Some people move through the world quietly, observing more than they speak. They notice patterns others overlook, feelings unspoken, and motives hidden behind polite smiles. They are the quiet observers, standing slightly apart, not because they desire solitude, but because the world around them often feels too loud, too chaotic, too focused on what is immediate rather than what is essential. These observers carry a subtle weight. They understand truths that make others uncomfortable, and in that understanding, they become outsiders, not by choice, but by necessity. There's a strange clarity in seeing life without the filters most people use. The quiet observer can sense the tension in a room before it is spoken, recognize a lie before it is told, and detect sorrow before it is acknowledged. Yet, clarity brings isolation. While others chase approval, validation, or comfort, the observer's awareness highlights the gaps between what is and what could be. It is not arrogance or superiority that sets them apart. It is attentiveness. And that attentiveness, though a gift, carries a burden, a feeling of walking through a world that doesn't quite recognize or understand you. This burden, subtle yet persistent, is the first step toward understanding why being awake can feel so lonely. Society thrives on predictability. People prefer routines that feel safe and ideas that do not challenge their sense of self. Comfort zones are not just habits. They're shields against discomfort, uncertainty, and reflection. When someone steps outside those zones, raising questions or pointing out inconsistencies, the response is often instinctive: resistance, irritation, or avoidance. The quiet observer frequently encounters this resistance. A thoughtful comment may be dismissed with a laugh, a probing question met with silence, or a clear insight met with suspicion. This is not always malicious. It is protective. Most people are not ready to confront the gaps in their thinking or the contradictions in their lives. Accepting new perspectives is exhausting, even threatening. Yet, society cannot progress without challenge. The very insights that make observers feel like outsiders are the sparks that provoke growth. Still, the tension remains. Those who see more clearly are often unwelcome in spaces that value comfort over curiosity. The outsider begins to understand a simple truth. Wisdom is rarely celebrated in its early stages. Recognition often comes too late, if at all, and the path forward requires patience, resilience, and a willingness to bear quiet solitude. Clarity is a gift that cannot be hidden. Once the mind discerns patterns and truths with precision, it cannot unsee them. And yet, clarity comes at a cost. It makes the observer visible in ways they may not want. To speak clearly is to risk misunderstanding, to expose one's thought to ridicule, or to appear unkind to those who cling to simpler narratives. Consider a thinker who moves through life observing with precision. His words, carefully chosen, illuminate what others ignore. In a crowded room, his insight causes discomfort rather than admiration. People avoid his gaze, whisper about him, and misinterpret his motives. He has done nothing wrong, yet the clarity of his perception makes him vulnerable. Over time, he learns that to know too much is to invite judgment, even from those who outwardly smile. The mechanisms that silence wisdom are subtle. Ridicule, dismissal, neglect. These are the tools society uses to maintain equilibrium. It is not always cruel. Sometimes it is automatic, a reflexive way of avoiding disruption. A brilliant idea may be ignored, a delicate truth brushed aside, a quiet observation met with polite indifference. The outsider notices the pattern. The world prefers comfort to confrontation, familiarity to insight. The wise person feels the push and pull of this dynamic. They are drawn to speak, to share what they know, yet they understand the cost. Social bonds may fray, friendships may strain, and the safety of anonymity may disappear. The struggle becomes internal. Should they speak and risk alienation, or remain silent and preserve their solitude? It is a question without easy answers. This tension is humanizing. Even the most insightful mind wrestles with doubt, fear, and a desire for acceptance. The outsider is not a detached philosopher, but a person negotiating the complexities of life with acute awareness. Their clarity makes them sensitive, their insight makes them vulnerable, and their empathy makes them quietly powerful. In the end, the burden of the outsider is both a curse and a gift. They see too much, feel too deeply, and understand too clearly. Yet, within that solitude lies potential, the possibility of deeper thought, authentic connection, and transformative insight. Life may not recognize them immediately, society may resist their presence, but their vision remains, patiently waiting to be understood. Walking through the world as an observer is a lonely path, yet it is lined with small, profound truths. Each moment of clarity, each subtle observation, is a reminder that being awake has a price, but also a value. The outsider learns to move carefully, to speak with intention, and to embrace solitude without bitterness. In that quiet vigilance lies the beginning of wisdom, a rare understanding that few will ever appreciate, but one that shapes the world quietly, subtly, and inevitably. Groups move together like invisible currents, pulling individuals toward conformity without argument. The herd mentality is subtle, almost unnoticed, yet immensely powerful. People sense what others think and act accordingly, often suppressing their own observations to avoid friction. A single question, a different perspective, or a quiet insight can create unease, not curiosity. The collective instinct is to smooth over differences, prioritizing harmony over understanding. This is not deliberate cruelty, it is preservation. A society functions best when its members predict each other's behavior and avoid disruption. Yet this mechanism punishes those who think independently. The observer, the quiet thinker, or the innovator experiences an invisible pressure to comply. Their ideas may be original, profound even, but deviation feels risky. Over time, many learn to self-censor, hiding insights before they reach the surface. The herd shapes thought itself, often unconsciously, creating a world where silence becomes safer than speech and obedience quieter than curiosity. Fear of judgment casts a long shadow over those who perceive clearly. Even the smallest deviation from accepted norms invites scrutiny. Kierkegaard observed that the greatest terror is not the gaze of others, but the imagination of their judgment. The mind projects consequences, real or imagined, and the result is hesitation. The innovator senses the risk. Every word spoken, every choice revealed, carries the potential for criticism or misinterpretation. People may not understand intention, yet they react instinctively, labeling what is different as wrong or dangerous. The pressure is invisible but relentless, creating a quiet, persistent tension between expression and safety. Authority has long reinforced this silence. Kings, governments, religious institutions, and corporate hierarchies alike have suppressed voices that threaten established order. Insight challenges power by illuminating gaps, contradictions, or inconvenient truths. Those who see more clearly are rarely invited to the center of control. They're pushed to the margins, ignored, or actively silenced. History is filled with thinkers, philosophers, and whistleblowers whose discoveries or ideas were shunned because they disrupted stability. The mechanisms are rarely overt. Subtle social cues, a dismissive glance, a veiled insult, a change in tone, signal disapproval before words are even spoken. Power does not need force to maintain order. Authority thrives on conformity, on creating invisible boundaries that shape thought and limit influence. The wise learn quickly that insight alone is rarely enough to ensure safety or acceptance. The motives of those who observe more deeply are often misunderstood. Thinking differently is mistaken for selfishness, curiosity for rebellion, and clarity for criticism. The outsider's intentions are simple: to understand, to perceive, to act with awareness. Yet society interprets difference as threat. Someone who questions prevailing assumptions may be labeled dangerous, arrogant, or manipulative, even when their only goal is comprehension. This paradox persists because fear and familiarity dominate perception. People resist change in part because it is uncomfortable and in part because it threatens their sense of security. The observer's truth, though harmless in intent, challenges stability. Communities invent narratives that justify resistance, projecting motives onto the thinker rather than confronting the insight itself. Even in such an environment, subtle rebellion survives. The quiet observer finds ways to influence without confrontation, to guide without declaration. Thoughts are recorded in journals, shared in hushed conversations, or expressed through art, music, or writing. Influence is measured not by loud recognition, but by the slow, persistent shaping of minds over time. Micro-sabotage also exists in these dynamics. Gossip, veiled criticism, exclusion from opportunities, and subtle intimidation form a web around those who question norms. A sharp insight may be overshadowed by small, repeated gestures of disapproval, teaching the observer the invisible limits of influence within immediate social circles. Subtle intimidation works in tandem with these mechanisms. The wise learn that their voice can ripple outward, yet direct confrontation often provokes defensive walls. Even those who respect clarity may feel compelled to protect their own comfort, inadvertently undermining understanding. Observation becomes survival, a careful dance between expression and restraint. Yet wisdom does not vanish in these quiet struggles. Its spread is understated but enduring. Ideas planted subtly, shared in careful conversation, or reflected in thoughtful writing reach those who are ready to see. Influencers, peers, and future leaders may encounter these sparks, absorbing insight before they fully recognize its source. Knowledge moves like water, finding channels and cracks, shaping thought invisibly yet persistently. Even in a world resistant to difference, the whisper of influence leaves traces. It shapes culture over time, informs decisions, and nurtures growth in those sensitive enough to perceive nuance. The observer understands that impact is rarely immediate. Change happens slowly, through attention, reflection, and gentle guidance, rather than through force or insistence. Patience becomes the observer's greatest tool. Choosing silence over confrontation is not surrender, it is strategy. Speaking too soon risks distortion, while waiting allows clarity to resonate at the right moment. Timing becomes as important as truth, and restraint as valuable as insight. The wise learn to measure their words, preserving both influence and integrity, knowing that the quietest voice often has the longest echo. This understanding prepares the observer for challenges yet to come. Influence is subtle, wisdom is patient, and the social mirrors that once reflected insecurity can, over time, reflect understanding. Silence is not absence, but a vessel, carrying thought forward until the world is ready. In this patience lies both protection and power, setting the stage for what the mind will encounter next. To live authentically is to feel alone, even in a crowd. Kierkegaard observed that the individual exists in tension with society, and true understanding often isolates rather than connects. Most people move through life following familiar norms, adhering to routines without questioning. The thinker, however, notices discrepancies between surface and essence, between appearance and reality. This awareness creates a subtle, persistent solitude, not imposed externally, but arising naturally from clarity. The individual's path is inward, guided by reflection rather than approval. To embrace this path is to accept that being understood is rare. Most peers will mistake quiet contemplation for aloofness, independent thought for arrogance. Yet, in the stillness of self-examination, the observer discovers a richer, deeper existence, one less dictated by habit or expectation and more aligned with personal truth. Clarity comes with its own unease. To To perceive truth in a world accustomed to illusion generates a tension that manifests as anxiety. Not the clinical kind, but a profound existential awareness that every choice matters, that superficial comforts cannot soothe the restless mind. This anxiety is both gift and burden, signaling consciousness of life's depth, yet also alerting the thinker to inevitable friction with others who cling to simplicity. The discomfort extends beyond personal unease. When someone sees clearly, their presence disrupts the collective ease. Truth can feel like accusation to those unready to face it. The wise must navigate a delicate balance. To speak invites misunderstanding, yet silence risks stagnation. Anxiety becomes the companion of insight, a reminder that observation alone is insufficient without discernment and patience. Kierkegaard's solution was subtle yet profound. He communicated indirectly, weaving wisdom into stories, parables, and layered reflections. Ideas were never bluntly imposed, but offered in a form that encourages self-discovery. This method protects both speaker and listener. The thinker avoids confrontation, while the audience retains freedom to engage without feeling coerced. Indirect communication, however, intensifies isolation. Those who grasp the hidden meaning may find themselves alone with it, unable to share fully with a world accustomed to literalness. The observer's insights are private treasures, illuminating yet inaccessible to casual understanding. In this delicate interplay, wisdom and solitude intertwine, reinforcing each other in quiet persistence. Faith and doubt coexist in this landscape of careful communication. Genuine conviction often demands silence, especially when society is unprepared or hostile. Belief cannot be forced, and understanding cannot be demanded. To hold a truth that others resist is to carry it privately, nurturing it until circumstances allow expression. The thinker learns patience as an essential companion to courage. Silence is not emptiness. It is intentional, a space where reflection, observation, and subtle influence coexist. In hostile environments, quiet endurance preserves integrity and allows insight to mature. Speaking too soon risks distortion, yet remaining attentive cultivates depth. The wise become guardians of their own awareness, navigating external pressures without surrendering internal truth. Ultimately, Kierkegaard frames the path of wisdom as an act of courage. To embrace solitude, to confront anxiety, and to live in accordance with inner truth requires strength unseen by the casual observer. The individual's existence is a quiet rebellion, not loud or confrontational, but persistent and transformative in its own time. Existence demands courage not for spectacle, but for authenticity. The thinker who navigates isolation with attentiveness, patience, and subtle influence embodies the quiet heroism Kierkegaard admired. Their reward is not applause, but the clarity and depth of a life fully lived, a rare understanding that shapes both self and, eventually, the world. To live this way is to accept paradox. The closer one comes to insight, the further one may feel from collective comfort. The wise endure this tension, understanding that the cost of perception is temporary isolation, while the benefit is an enduring comprehension of life's nuances. Awareness becomes both compass and companion, guiding choices and offering quiet reassurance. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to observe rather than control. The wise note reactions, read subtleties, and measure influence with care. They learn that the world often resists truth not out of malice, but because it challenges assumptions, habits, and self-image. Patience allows observation to be instructive rather than reactive, offering space for others to engage without confrontation. The courage Kierkegaard described is not dramatic heroism, but persistence in thought. To hold convictions, to act ethically, and to perceive deeply in a world that prefers ease is an ongoing act of bravery. Each choice to observe, each decision to reflect before responding, is a micro-heroism unnoticed by society but vital to the individual's integrity. The thinker also learns humility. Clarity does not mean omniscience, and awareness does not eliminate doubt. Accepting the limits of perception fosters empathy, patience, and the recognition that others operate from their own understanding. Solitude becomes a classroom, where wisdom is tested not in debate, but in quiet engagement with self and world. Finally, embracing this lens reshapes life. Decisions are guided by insight rather than impulse. Relationships are navigated with awareness rather than reaction. Even in loneliness, the observer discovers connection through understanding. The rare reward of authentic existence is the ability to move through life with clarity, subtle influence, and a quiet, enduring sense of purpose. Every group carries invisible mirrors, reflecting not truth, but fear, insecurity, and unacknowledged desires. People project their anxieties onto those who see more clearly, reacting not to reality, but to the discomfort it produces. The observer's insight can unsettle, creating subtle tension rather than admiration. Society's instinct is to silence, ignore, or ridicule what challenges collective comfort. This is rarely deliberate malice. It is a protective reflex, preserving equilibrium at the expense of understanding. The wise notice how envy and insecurity manifest. A comment may be twisted, a compliment shaded with sarcasm, a nod of acknowledgement hiding doubt. These reactions are not about the observer's merit. They're about others' need to defend their comfort. Every sharp insight, every perception too deep for casual attention, exposes unprepared minds to unease. The outsider learns early that clarity can provoke fear more often than curiosity, and that social harmony often outweighs truth. Conformity is reassuring. Aligning with the crowd reduces friction, anxiety, and unpredictability. People seek familiar patterns because they promise safety and ease. Novelty, especially the novelty of honest perception, threatens that safety. The quiet observer becomes a living challenge, highlighting contradictions, inconsistencies, and uncomfortable possibilities. Resistance is instinctive because comfort feels like survival. This resistance rarely announces itself openly. Micro cues, pauses, changes in tone, subtle avoidance, enforce conformity quietly but effectively. The outsider recognizes these invisible barriers and navigates them with care. Deviating too sharply risks exclusion, ridicule, or diminished influence. Observers quickly learn that the world prefers polite silence to uncomfortable honesty, and that restraint can be as powerful as expression. Subtle sabotage often accompanies resistance. Gossip circulates, opinions are misrepresented, opportunities are withheld, and small exclusions compound. A perceptive comment may be overshadowed by whispers, a meaningful contribution ignored or reframed. These microacts are rarely overt, yet they shape perception, influence, and social dynamics. The outsider discovers that survival in society requires awareness of both words and silences, influence and avoidance. Even subtle intimidation plays a role. Social pressure works in tandem with unconscious bias to maintain stability. Those who respect clarity may nonetheless enforce boundaries unconsciously, afraid of disruption. The wise learn that influence is never straightforward. Observation and patience are as vital as articulation, and the impact of insight often travels along hidden currents rather than loud, visible channels. Yet wisdom is resilient. Ideas, even when suppressed, find ways to spread. Observers plant thoughts carefully, share insights with select individuals, or leave traces in writing and art. Knowledge moves quietly, like water through cracks in stone, eventually reaching minds prepared to receive it. Influence is rarely immediate. It is cumulative, persistent, and subtle. Those who notice patterns, who reflect deeply, gradually integrate these insights into understanding without the source ever being fully recognized. The whisper of influence is powerful precisely because it is indirect. Culture, thought leaders, and personal development are shaped more by subtle guidance than by overt confrontation. The observer's presence is felt through small, repeated exposures to truth, patience, and careful framing. Recognition is not necessary for efficacy. What matters is the transformation triggered in minds attuned to subtlety. Patience becomes a defining characteristic. Choosing when to speak, when to remain silent, and when to act ensures that insight lands effectively. Timing is as important as content. The quiet observer understands that wisdom must be introduced delicately, that forcing understanding can provoke rejection rather than acceptance. Silence is not absence. It is strategy, a tool that preserves influence and cultivates readiness in others. Even in a world resistant to change, subtle influence accumulates. Microactions, careful suggestions, and understated examples ripple outward. The quiet thinker becomes an unseen force, shaping thought without visible confrontation. Influence grows not through immediacy, but through persistence, consistency, and a gentle modeling of behavior, values, and attention. Choosing silence is an art. It requires restraint, judgment, and awareness of timing. The wise learn to observe reactions, to sense readiness, and to measure the impact of their words. Speaking too soon risks distortion, while waiting allows perception to settle. The observer cultivates an understanding that patience, quiet guidance, and subtlety often produce far more enduring effects than confrontation. This patience is not weakness. It is strength expressed over time. The social mirrors that once reflected insecurity can eventually reflect understanding. Influence moves quietly, accumulating layers of comprehension and reflection. The observer becomes an architect of subtle change, shaping thought without drawing attention to the process. In this interplay of observation, silence, and patient influence, the outsider finds purpose. The world resists difference, yet wisdom persists. The quiet observer learns that lasting change rarely shouts. It seeps into minds through subtle channels, spreads in patterns unnoticed, and arrives when conditions are right. The power of the wise lies not in visibility, but in patience, discretion, and the ability to endure social friction without surrendering insight. The dynamics of mirrors, reactions, and influence create a delicate ecosystem. Those who see clearly navigate it with care, understanding that resistance is natural and subtle, and that the true measure of impact is cumulative, indirect, and enduring. In these quiet currents, insight flows steadily, shaping thought, behavior, and perception long after immediate recognition has faded. Solitude is not emptiness. It is space for thought to breathe and for awareness to grow. In quiet moments, free from distraction, understanding deepens. Thoughts unfold slowly. Connections emerge naturally, and clarity settles like morning light on a still lake. The wise learn that isolation is not punishment, but nourishment. Reflection requires distance from expectation, opinion, and the need for approval. In solitude, the mind becomes a laboratory where ideas are tested, motives examined, and patterns traced. Each thought carries weight because it is unhurried, unobserved, and free from the rush of approval. Insight emerges not from applause, but from patient attention to life's subtleties. Those who embrace this space discover depth in ordinary moments and a perspective few others recognize. Listening quietly is as valuable as speaking clearly. Wisdom often exists in corners overlooked, in voices marginalized, and in truths spoken softly. Recognizing this requires patience and attentiveness. Observers notice what others miss, acknowledging ideas before they are polished, and valuing insight even when it is inconvenient or uncomfortable. The power of listening extends beyond awareness. It shapes understanding. Small truths, gently acknowledged, ripple outward. They guide decisions, refine perception, and influence action in subtle but enduring ways. The quiet mind becomes fertile soil for these seeds, nurturing comprehension that flourishes in time. Patience outweighs recognition. Immediate validation is rare for those who choose reflection over spectacle. A writer whose work is ignored, a thinker whose words go unnoticed, or a quiet guide whose lessons are overlooked may still influence generations. Recognition may never come, yet the long-term impact of thought is profound. Influence is measured not by applause, but by transformation. Consider a teacher whose ideas are dismissed by peers. Students misunderstand, colleagues ignore, and society overlooks effort. Decades later, the same concepts shape thought, behavior, and culture. The lesson is clear. Patience ensures that wisdom endures, even when initial acknowledgement is absent. Immediate praise is fleeting. Lasting influence arrives gradually. Applying insight requires subtlety. Wisdom does not always demand dramatic action. Small adjustments in behavior, measured words, careful observation, and intentional choices often transform circumstances more than forceful intervention. Quiet influence aligns with readiness, timing, and perception, creating change without confrontation. Transformation is rarely explosive. It emerges through consistent attention, reflection, and deliberate action. Integrating insight into daily life strengthens character, enhances empathy, and fosters clarity. Change is both internal and outward, subtle yet profound, touching self, others, and broader systems without fanfare. Choosing the wise path is an act of courage. It means embracing solitude, observing patiently, and acting with deliberation. Those who walk it are rare, not for external recognition, but for depth of awareness and integrity of choice. Their courage lies in the quiet discipline of thought and the persistence to act according to insight, even when unnoticed. To follow this path is to accept paradox. The closer one moves toward understanding, the further one may feel from collective comfort. Social approval may be delayed or withheld entirely. The wise endure this tension, recognizing that short-term isolation is the price of long-term clarity and influence. Awareness becomes both compass and companion, guiding decisions with patience and subtlety. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to observe and influence subtly. The wise note reactions, measure responses, and understand readiness. The world often resists truth not out of malice, but because it challenges assumptions, habits, and comfort. The observer cultivates patience, realizing that gentle, well-timed guidance is often more effective than direct instruction. Courage in this context is persistence in thought and action. To hold convictions, perceive deeply, and act ethically within a world that prefers ease requires ongoing bravery. Each moment of careful observation, each deliberate choice, and each measured word constitutes microheroism. These acts rarely draw attention, yet they define character and build enduring influence. Humility is central to this path. Clarity does not eliminate doubt, and awareness does not remove limitations. Accepting these limits fosters empathy, patience, and understanding. Solitude becomes a classroom, where wisdom is refined not by debate, but by careful reflection, attention, and engagement with life as it is. Finally, embracing the wise path reshapes existence. Decisions are guided by insight rather than impulse. Relationships are navigated with attention rather than reaction. Even in isolation, the observer finds connection through understanding. The rare reward of authentic living is the ability to move through life with clarity, patience, and subtle influence. Choosing this path creates a rare identity. It values depth over spectacle, reflection over noise, and integrity over immediate approval. To walk it is to join a lineage of rare minds, thinkers who shape life quietly but persistently. Their influence spreads not through loud proclamation, but through consistency, subtle guidance, and enduring understanding. To embrace the wise path is to accept responsibility. Responsibility for thought, attention, and the consequences of action. It is not a pursuit of fame or recognition, but of clarity, insight, and meaningful influence. Those who succeed in this path are rare because they endure friction without compromise, observing and guiding without spectacle, and acting with patience and purpose. Ultimately, the wise discover that rarity is not an external accolade, but an internal state. It is the harmony of understanding, patience, and courage, exercised quietly in everyday life. By embracing solitude, listening attentively, exercising patience, and applying insights subtly, they join a quiet tribe of minds capable of transforming the world without demanding its approval.